All right, today we are diving deep into the crisis that has been gripping Alabama's prison system. It's a situation so severe that it triggered one of the most ambitious and, frankly, one of the most controversial reform plans this country has seen in a long time.
This wasn't just a case of things being bad. We're talking about the U.S. Department of Justice stepping in back in 2019 and declaring it a full-blown constitutional crisis. This report was absolutely scathing, finding that the conditions were so awful they violated the Eighth Amendment rights of the people incarcerated there.
So here's how we're going to break this down. First, we'll look at just how bad the crisis really was. Then, the huge plan they came up with to fix it. How they were going to pay for it, the big debate that followed, this whole other piece about parole that you might not know about, and finally, how the whole thing fell apart.
Okay, so first up, a system in crisis. And really, to understand the proposed solution, you have to grasp just how fundamentally broken things were. Get this. Back in 2016, an assessment came out with this staggering number, $440 million. And listen, that wasn't for fancy upgrades or new programs. That was just the cost to get the existing prisons up to basic safety codes and deal with all the maintenance they'd put off for years.
And it went way beyond just crumbling buildings. I mean, the DOJ found Eighth Amendment violations for violence and abuse. The prisons were dangerously overcrowded. Conditions were just awful. So bad, in fact, that a separate study recommended just closing 7 of the state's 17 major prisons completely. They were basically saying these places are beyond saving.
So faced with this total system failure, the state came up with this massive, radical new plan. It was called the Alabama Prison Transformation Initiative, or APTI for short.
And you got to understand the ambition here. The goal wasn't just to patch the leaks. The commissioner at the time said they wanted to transform Alabama's system into a national model for corrections in the 21st century. I mean, talk about a complete 180.
So how were they going to do it? Well, the whole plan rested on these 4 big pillars. 1, shut down 14 of the old crumbling facilities. 2, build 4 brand new, huge, state-of-the-art regional prisons to replace them. 3, and this is a really key part of the whole thing, rethink staffing completely. They wanted to use technology as a force multiplier, meaning smart design and new tech would let them run these places safely and effectively with fewer officers. And 4, with these modern facilities, they could finally offer real rehabilitation and re-entry programs to help people succeed when they got out.
Okay, a plan that big sounds expensive, right? And it was. We're talking around $800 million. So the big question on everyone's mind was, how on earth are you going to pay for this without raising taxes? And this is where the financial blueprint gets pretty clever. The state's whole argument was that they could cover the nearly $50 million a year bond payments without any new money. How? By saving a ton on operations. The idea was that these new, efficient prisons would drastically cut costs on things like staff overtime, they'd need fewer staff overall, and they could consolidate services like healthcare. So the plan was designed to, essentially, pay for itself out of its own savings.
So the state has this plan. It looks solid on paper, but not everyone was convinced. Critics, and that includes the federal government, started asking a really tough question. Can you really solve old, deep-seated problems just by building new buildings?
And this right here, this is the heart of the debate. On one side, you have the state saying, look, modern facilities are the key. They're the foundation you need for any real change. But on the other side, you have the Department of Justice warning that shiny new buildings alone won't fix a toxic culture of violence, understaffing, and corruption. You can't just build your way out of a people problem.
And it wasn't just a DC debate either. Down on the ground in rural Alabama, communities started organizing to fight back. I mean, they were worried that these new mega prisons would just completely overwhelm their local water systems, bring a lot of noise and traffic, and tank their property values. And they felt like this was all happening without them having any real say in the process.
All right, so while everyone's arguing about buildings, there was this other huge problem bubbling up right under the surface. A problem that was making the overcrowding issue, the very thing the plan was supposed to fix, way, way worse. And that was the parole system.
Check out these numbers. After new leadership took over the parole board in 2019, the rate at which people were granted parole just fell off a cliff. It went from over 50% all the way down to just 15%. Think about that. Thousands of people who were eligible for parole were suddenly being kept in prison, just adding more and more pressure to an already overflowing system.
And to understand what this means for actual people, let's talk about a man named Thomas. He'd been in prison for over 30 years, and by all accounts, he'd really done the work. He took responsibility, saying, I didn't have no sense then. I was doing things my way and still doing drugs, which is what led to all my problems.
But even with that kind of progress, even with a wife and community ready to support him, his parole was denied. And not for a few months, for another 5 years. His wife said they were just overwhelmed with sadness. His story really puts a face on a system that many felt was being run on fear, not on whether someone had actually been rehabilitated.
So, you've got this perfect storm brewing, right? You have legal challenges from the DOJ, you've got fierce opposition from local communities, and you have a parole system that's basically shut down. All of this put the state's big plan on a direct collision course with reality.
And here's how it all came crashing down. A coalition of community groups and activists figured out the plan's Achilles heel: the money. They went directly after the big financial institutions that were backing the deal. And it worked. They put on so much pressure that in April 2021, the main underwriter, Barclays, just walked away. And with that, the whole deal fell apart. So, what happened in Alabama leaves us with this huge fundamental question. And it's not just about one state. When a prison system is this broken, where do you even start? Is the answer new buildings and better technology, or is it a complete overhaul of the policies, the culture, and the people that got you into that mess in the first place? What is the true path to reform?